The Hornets lose big over to the Hawks this weekend. In fact, it's really bad. How ugly is it going to get before the season ends? We'll talk about that today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, as always, and that includes YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. There's Doug Branson. You can find him on his Substack, Every Hornets Boxscore.com, writing about an ugly Hornets loss to the Hawks. And you can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m., 92.7 FM on Wes and Walker. Is it happening again, Doug, where we do the whole, there's just not enough intensity? Now we're starting to play a little lethargic, because that was Steve Clifford's comments after the game. It wasn't really like that specifically. Didn't seem to be a problem to me for the Hornets post-trade deadline. PJ Washington was accused of not giving it his all at times. The whole team, right, before they started to go with the trade deadline and bring in some new blood, it felt like that new blood gave this team life. You go on the winning streak, 5 out of 6, and at least they're playing better basketball. Well, then we started to have the not necessarily rock bottom conversation before we got to the weekend, but we did start to talk about, is the fatigue settling in? You thought that was a much better word than apathy from the fan base, which I agree with. And then you have just the players, as soon as Steve Clifford starts to sub, his words, not mine, we lost intensity once I started to sub. Well, that's a new guy in Poku. That's a new guy in Grant Williams. Those are the first two guys off of the bench. And you also are going to some of the younger players, and they get beat by 40, losing to the Hawks 132 to 91. Like, is it happening again, is my question to lead off the show to you today, Doug?
Well, I don't know that it's happening again this season. I mean, I feel like this is one of the very few times that I've watched a game and said, they truly don't believe they have any chance of competing in this game, and they aren't trying very hard. That is not, you could say a lot about this team, that it's devoid of like NBA level talent at particular positions. It's not a very deep team. It's a very injured team. Like, there are a lot of things you can say, but those guys don't try hard is not something that you and I have jumped onto this show and said a lot. And had we been saying that, I don't think Steve Clifford would be the coach right now. And honestly, if it continues through the rest of the season, I don't know that he'll be the head coach moving forward. Because, look, if you look back to last season, they had a lot of the same headwinds that they have now, and they closed that season strong, particularly because of P.J. Washington's expanded offensive output and role on the team. But you also had other little guys, too, like Svi Mikhailuk. Remember SU Svi? Like, there were Teo Maladone, who disappeared for a while, was on the back of the milk cart and suddenly showed up and was dishing out like eight or 9 assists per game. There were all these little pieces that were sprinkled in there that made that season close strong despite all of the injuries. And so I think what we're seeing now is that sort of slipping lack of belief. The Hornets were officially eliminated from the playoffs with that loss to the Atlanta Hawks, but unofficially they've been out of the playoff race for a few weeks now. And I think guys do look ahead at the schedule and go, oh boy, I mean, lots of competition, lots of good teams coming up. It's going to be a difficult finish for the entire team. They've been getting off to good starts the past couple of games. These past 2 bad losses began well with the starting unit. There has been some cohesion with that starting unit. And then when the new guys come in, I think the starters that are left on the floor take a breather. And they really can't afford to take a breather because the level of talent that they're subbing in, I don't think it's about Poku or Grant not bringing it off the bench. I think it's like just a collective like, oh boy, here we go. And like everybody just sort of loses that, whatever that edge is. Because if they got blown out from the very start of this game, if there was like a 14-0 Hawks run, then I would say, wow, yeah, everybody's quit. I don't think that's quite it.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it did feel like before they made the trades that we would somewhat go to that conversation frequently of they didn't have the intensity and they didn't try. It didn't feel like they tried defensively, maybe like specifically pinning it down to just the defensive side where they weren't bringing the intensity. Like it did feel like that would be a comment from Clifford or a comment from us every once in a while before we did have this, overhaul of the roster where you're changing like 50% of the rotation. It did feel like that to me, but maybe and it hasn't happened since then. That's my point, right? Like once the new guys came in defensively, they did bring it. Here, they get 130 on them. DeJounte Murray goes for a season high 7 threes, and Bruno Fernando goes for a career
I was going to
high.
say, it wasn't even about Murray. It was about these guys they had 51 bench points before we did all the deep reserve subbing midway through the fourth quarter. It was Bruno Fernando, 25 points. It was that Garrison Matthews guy. I mean, Atlanta, watching Atlanta play must be what it's like for most other NBA fans watching the Hornets play. It's just a cavalcade of who he play for, all-stars.
Cavalcade, nice.
Thank you. I spent some time flipping through the thesaurus over the weekend.
I mean, it nice job. Like it shows with a cavalcade. That's a new one. That is one that we can put on the board. That hang the jersey in the rafters. It's a good one.
So my thing is they've been playing better defensively. It takes effort and intensity, to play well defensively in this league. You have to try very hard to play well defensively in this league because the offensive talent on the other side of the floor is pretty overwhelming. And I think what we're seeing now is a series of losses that the Hornets have taken where they've held the opponent to 105, 109, where the defense has been good enough to win, and they've been scoring 91 points. And I mean, maybe we can talk about this in the next segment. Something's going on with Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
I mean, stinker, like total stinker in this one, but also wasn't really all that involved. I think he scored 4 points on 2 of 5 shooting in the first half. Like, what's going on there? The offense was running through that guy. And I don't know if that's something that changed coaching-wise, where they're not running enough plays through him, or if it's a situation where he's decided to take a back seat and let others create for him. But something's going on there because that guy should not be taking only 5 shots in the first half.
All right, let's do it. Let's get to that conversation coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
It's going to be tough, but I do want to talk about the upcoming schedule, and we'll also get to Brandon Miller. Micic had a bad game, but much more of a longer sample size here in the month of March with Brandon Miller as to him just not having it as much as he used to. We'll get to all of that on Locked On Hornets. Before we have that convo, I want to tell you people about Robinhood. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Almost went Italian accent there. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. The offer is good through April 30th. You can get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. You can claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker dealer. This episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. It reminds me of the scene in Joe Dirt where the guy is selling all those fireworks. We got snicker-doos, we got snicker-don'ts. eBay Motors has the snicker-doos and the snicker-don'ts. You just need to go check it out. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. More Locked On Hornets ahead.
Whisker do's, whisker don'ts.
It is whisker do's and don't. I said snicker do's, I think. It's whisker, right? I think you're right about that.
I think I'm right about that. I actually, producer Katie bought me a T-shirt with that whole monologue printed on the front of the shirt. It was from David Spade's website. I'll say this. They didn't try very hard with the T-shirt design. It was like a gray T-shirt with black lettering. You can't really read it. Wonderful T-shirt quality. I'll say that. It's one of my favorite T-shirts to wear. But if I wore it out in public, people wouldn't even know that it was about Joe Dirt. So, yeah. That's
you don't think maybe? Yeah, I mean, it hits with me. In fact, I went to it, even though I got it a little bit. What do you got? Like cherry bombs? How much could you get through?
You're telling me.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. That's what it reminds me of. Every time I roll through that list, that's what it reminds me of. Okay, let's have the Brandon Miller combo, Doug, because you're right. It's not been great for him in the month of March. He won Rookie of the Month in the Eastern Conference. The two previous months, February, January, 13 games in each of those months, and didn't shoot and terribly efficiently in January, but did so very well in February. Like, he was really good. Those are the best numbers really on high volume that he posted all season long. And so here he is in 10 games in March, and here are his numbers. He's shooting 41.5% from the field. He's shooting 33.8% from three, 63.6% from the free throw line. That's real different. That's very bad compared to his own numbers of what he's put up all year long before that. The true shooting percentage, that's the worst that it's been his entire rookie year. The usage percentage is about the same. 17.1 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 2.5 assists. The counting stats, they're all about the same, but we know the efficiency just has not been there nearly as much. What are you seeing, Doug? Is there anything that you can pinpoint as to what might be a problem?
He doesn't look like the same player. That's what really concerns me the most. Like, I don't care. Honestly, I don't care about the misses at this point. Although I wonder if the shot struggles, particularly from outside, have just started to leak, not into the confidence, but just leak into the rhythm and get him frustrated and get him out of just sort of the mentality that you have to continue to get yourself out of this hole. I just wonder if that's a factor, or if there's something else going on that could explain it, because maybe he's just not used to losing. It's like, welcome to the Hornets, Brandon. Maybe in high school you won a lot, Alabama, you had a decent season there. But it's not, things aren't always cheery here in Hornets land, and so maybe there is an adjustment there. Maybe it's rookie wall. I don't know. I would love an explanation that would satisfy me, so that I didn't have to be concerned that this was some sort of systemic issue with him, which I honestly don't think it is. I just think it's a rough end of the season for him. But like, the usage percentage in this past game against the Hawks, right? His usage percentage, the amount of time the ball was in his hands and he was doing stuff with it, his usage percentage was 19. Okay? Micic's was 18.4. Trey Mann was 19. Grant Williams was 22.1. And then Miles Bridges, who was the only one that had a decent game in this one, he finished with 27 points, 5 rebounds on 58% shooting, and then 57% from three, so he's knocking down his threes. Clifford mentioned him. This was a strange thing from Clifford. He mentioned a player saying, like, Miles Bridges was the effort player, and it ended there, right?
Yeah.
So, you expect him to have the ball to be in his hands a lot. But yeah, some of those other players, Nick Smith Jr.'s usage percentage, by the way, was 59.2%. When he gets in there,
Yeah, not bad.
When he gets in there, man, it's like, no, that ball is going up. There's no question about it. Nobody's touching it. It's the Nick Smith Jr. show.
Yeah, like looking at what he was doing here, like you're right. He doesn't look like the same exact player, and it really has been kind of at the turn of the month, right? Like that's kind of how the numbers have coincided with some of the dip in productivity. You know, only scoring 13. Right, with him not having the ball nearly as much. My question is, how much of it is a coaching thing where they're just trying to get a fair evaluation on what Trey Mann and Micic are doing too, right? So if he's playing, because you're looking at a starting lineup that features Micic, Mann, and Miller. So if Miller and Micic, or excuse me, if Mann and Micic are guys that you and I have both talked about, it's, you know, one of the bigger questions that you have going into next year, once everybody gets healthy and then you really make a go at this thing for the Eastern Conference play-in or playoffs, it's who's going to be that sixth man, who is going to be a part of your backcourt depth, and it's Micic and Mann. And so now you're giving those guys all the opportunities in the world, and is that taking the ball away from Miller? Like, I wonder how much of it is not necessarily coaching mandated by Jeff Peterson, hey, this is going to help us next year, we really need to take a look at them, or if Steve Clifford is just trying to spread the wealth. Is it Clifford at all? Those are some of the questions that are rolling in my head.
I don't know that it's Clifford at all, honestly, because I don't, up to this point, now moving forward, now that they're officially eliminated from playoff contention, I think there will be a little bit more like, all right, let's let the Rogue go and evaluate some guys. But I think up to this point, you know, you just look at the 8-man rotation. Like, if they were truly evaluating this roster, they wouldn't be playing 8 guys. They would be playing Nick Smith Jr. more than he's been playing than this like emergency guy that just comes in and takes some shots at the end of the game. So I think they have been playing to win. So I think it's less Clifford and more, you've brought in guys out of the trade deadline that are looking to showcase their talents. They're not looking to help Brandon Miller become an all-NBA level player. And they didn't come in here. Brandon Miller wasn't drafted onto Micic's team, onto Mann's team, onto Grant Williams' team. They were brought onto Brandon Miller's team, right? And so none of that sort of institutional knowledge existed with those guys when they came in. They're all looking to showcase their talents and say to the Hornets organization, hey, I'm worth keeping. And that's why I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't just been Bridges doing the like ISO ball that just kills the offense, frustrates you. It's not been Miles Bridges only. It's been Micic at times. It's been Mann at times. It's been Grant Williams playing hero ball at times. And I just think that's part of it. And Brandon Miller, you got to feel for this guy, right? He comes into the season, LaMelo Ball, the guy that wanted Brandon Miller to be drafted to this team, was going to be his point guard. Oops, that's out. Now you got Ish Smith. Oops, that's out. You had Teo Maladone for a hot second. Oops, that's out. Now you've got Micic and Mann. So, like, you've got Terry Rozier for a while, too. Like, I mean, it's just like one of these guys, quarterbacks, you know, in the league that come in and all of a sudden they've had 3 head coaches in 3 years. It's difficult to establish a rhythm. It's difficult to get anything, you know, close to what you would expect a guy that needs to develop would have at the point guard position. So I just think he's got to fight through this at this point.
Well, and the other thing, too, I was looking at the assist percentage for Brandon Miller and where that's been. It went up, right? Like it was going up at the end of the season that's already transpired. And now you start to look at the last few games. 1 assist recorded in each of the last 4 losses. The last time he had more than 1 assist was 5 in the win against Memphis, but that's it. So now you're not even seeing the assists go up. The points aren't there. The efficiency isn't there. No, all of that sounds like listing for what is a terrible player. He's still not a terrible player. We all understand that this is under the umbrella of Brandon Miller being a rookie. Okay, now that's going to fall on deaf ears and people are going to say we're hating on him. It's just different. I think that's the question, right? The fact that he looks so different compared to the dude that legitimately going away won each of the last 2 Rookie of the Month awards. And even at the beginning, before he was really getting a lot of volume, when there was like some semblance of health with this team, Brandon looked different. And now it's starting to change a little bit. It could just be that he's tired. That's very possible and understandable. Like, I get it. It's not the same. That's what you and I are trying to say.
Well, and he's been like 5 different players this season. Like to open the season, he was the guy that we thought he was going to be for most of the season, which guy who comes off the bench, knocks down a few shots, averages 12 points a game, maybe gives you a little bit here or there, but you're looking for him to be just a shot creator maker off the bench. So he started out as that guy, and then everybody got injured, and he became this like premier piece, and he's been a do-it-all guy at times. At times he's been like, I'm going to go and score 20 points and have 2 rebounds, and you're lucky if I throw it to anyone else for an assist. So he's been that guy too, and now he's transitioned into this guy who's just kind of taking a back seat, and that's the worst version of Brandon Miller. That's all I'm saying is I want him, like no playoffs, all that's out the window. You've gotten some time to rest here because of the NCAA tournament, because of the schedule. You're now going to get to stay home for a while. I want to see aggressive Brandon Miller trying to do a little bit of everything for this team because I think ultimately that's the player that he wants to become. He wants to become Paul George. That's what Paul George does. He racks up steals. Oh, we've seen that version of Brandon Miller too, where I'm going to score, 20 points and 5 rebounds. I'll have 2 steals. I have a couple blocks. But we got that in just a little short stretch. I want to see him, go out there and be that guy for the rest of the way. And it is on the coaching staff too to say, hey, Micic, man, everybody, all right, good audition, cool it. We got to figure this thing out with Brandon Miller.
Well, and to Clifford's credit, he's taken some of the ownership on that. I don't know how many times he's been asked about it, but when it was in the first Orlando game of the month. It was right after that where he was rolling. That's actually a pretty good game from him. And you remember the Jonathan Isaac, sending him on skates clip that was going viral. And he said, I have to do a better job of getting Brandon more opportunities because that might have been the best. Was that the best offensive chance quote? That might have been Milwaukee, but it was against Orlando too. He said, we got to make sure that we get him more opportunities in order to score and create some offense for others. And so that if that's the case, then all right, the time's now. Like that's what we want. So
it's strange, man. I really lean towards rookie wall. I know he doesn't believe in it. I do believe that this season has worn on him a little bit, and he didn't, to his not credit, but like a little bit of an excuse making thing here is that, because of the stuff that he dealt with off of that end of his only season in college, the mono stuff, he didn't get that same kind of ramp up that maybe, your typical rookie would. So I might have been playing behind the 8 ball anyway, but like he's looked sluggish. Offensively, he's looked sluggish defensively. Like if you go back and look at this Atlanta game, Bogdanovich owned him, like just took him to the cleaners on mid-range, off ball. Like he just doesn't have it right now. And I hope there's a neat explanation for it. And really you just hope it's more physical and not mental.
Yeah, that would be what we'll see what happens in the next month or basically the next month of time or so because the schedule gets harder. Let's go through that schedule. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
It's brutal, folks. It's nice to be back home, but the guests aren't all that inviting once you realize who's coming through that door. It's going to be real tough with all of the competition you're facing. We'll discuss the upcoming schedule in the next segment. Before we get to the schedule, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. That's it. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. It's demon time, too, on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. That's it. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. One more segment to go. Locked On Hornets. Doug, before we get to the schedule, you had one other comment you wanted to share from Miles Bridges after this loss to the Hawks.
Yeah, again, I thought he was, one of the few players that took responsibility on the floor. And I thought he did a good job of taking some responsibility off the floor as well, really outlining it, saying essentially that there's no reason for any team to come to a game and play harder than the Charlotte Hornets, and that they weren't physical enough. But he also said, look, it was an off night. And here's the one problem I have with this post game press conference post game scrum that he had, is he said it was an off game for us, 3 days off. It's tough to come back and get right back into the flow of the game. So we just got to pick our intensity up. Look, you can't. I can't hear as a fan over and over, hey, this 8 games in 13 nights. We've been playing back to back. The schedule's rough. And then you get 3 days off and you come in and lay that stinker. I'm sorry. I cannot hear that. I cannot both hear that the schedule's been tough and that after 3 days, it's tough to get in the flow of the game. No, I do not. I deny it. You cannot say that. I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny because I was looking at the splits for Brandon Miller, and so I don't know what it is for Miles or some of the other players, but when we were talking about Brandon, I was just looking at some of the stats and the splits, right? And 3+ days rest for Brandon, it's actually his third best shooting percentage from the field. He's actually better from the field overall on 0 days rest, so back-to-back, and 1 day's rest. Now, 3-point percentage, that's pretty damn good at 40% on 3+ days, but the counting stats are down. It's just interesting. I wonder how much of it is back-to-backs are tough. Players don't like them. I'm inclined to believe that because, of course, it makes sense. Sure, numbers back it up. The whole scheduled losses thing, that's all real. But how hard is it if you don't have that sweet spot of 1 to 2 days rest in order to try to get back into the flow when you're on 3 days rest? That is interesting to me because it was a long time before games. I think it was Tuesday to Saturday was the amount of time you had off.
What's also interesting is the past couple of losses, even though they've been out, some of them have been out on the road, they have featured appearances by one or more of the ownership group and Jeff Peterson. Rick Schnall and Jeff Peterson were pictured there watching this particular loss. And I know a lot of people immediately go to, oh boy, they're watching Steve Clifford. They're going to fire this guy. There's a threshold. And certainly there may be some element to that, but they're also watching these players.
Yeah.
I mentioned Micic and Mann and, not really Grant, but Micic, Mann. These guys are auditioning for the Hornets essentially because, look, they're auditioning for other teams too because they're on good contracts. It's not as if the Hornets brought a bunch of guys who are on terrible contracts that are going to be untradeable come this next period where they can trade in the offseason. And so, yeah, I think there's evaluation across the board, and it's really important for all of these players to play hard the rest of the way.
Especially because of the level of competition. Let's get to the schedule. You have back-to-back games against Cleveland. You have one more on the road before you're back at home at the Spectrum Center on Wednesday night. Golden State comes to town on Friday, and the Clippers come to town. It's Boston after the Clippers, and then it's Portland before you get a real break, and that's on April 3rd. And so that's tough. Cleveland back-to-back, Golden State, Clippers, Celtics, then you have Portland. But even after that, you ramp it up again. Yeah, it's going to be you're not going to be able to have the start that you had against the Hawks. If you can't have the start you had against the Hawks, then you can't have the start you had against the Hawks against the Clippers, the Celtics, Cleveland, or you might get beat by 50.
No, and this season is a little bit different, right? Because you've got teams coming in that are not going to be as prone to rest their starters as they would in previous seasons. You got some guys that may be needing to hit certain game thresholds for awards. And so I think the level of competition that they're going to see is even more heightened. And look, some of these guys have to step up, particularly off the bench. We can talk about Miles Bridges and his performances, and we can talk about Brandon Miller and his performances until we're blue in the face. But bottom line is, if you're going to go with an 8-man rotation, and Bertans is not going to hit a shot, and Grant Williams is not going to hit a shot, and Poku is going to take it up like a marshmallow at the rim and get blocked, look, there's nothing that Brandon Miller, and you saw in one of those losses recently where, Miles, after they had gotten down by 20 or something, Miles and Brandon score, a combined 23 points in a third quarter to try to lift the team up. There's only so much they can do. Some of these bench pieces do have to step it up, or, and I think this is somewhere where you could look at Clifford and go, hey, maybe playing 8 guys for this long was an error. Like maybe you should have been incorporating more Thor, who was injured in this game against Atlanta, but more Nick Smith Jr., some more guys that you could put the ball in their hands and ask them to go score, particularly because you've only been scoring 90 points a game. Maybe there was a little bit of an error there.
Well, and also, it's a great point because, Doug, even in this game, okay, you're discussing just within the normal rotation. Even in this matchup where they lost by 40 points, you still roll with your 8-man rotation, and Nick Smith Jr. and Amari Bailey only get, 6 combined? Even in a 40-point loss where the game was over, you weren't going to win. You can't throw Nick Smith Jr. in for 5 minutes afterwards. You're still that's a legitimate question too.
Well, I think
that
that may have been, when the puppy pees on the floor. Sometimes, you got to rub their face in it a little bit, right? There might have been like, look, you made this bed by not trying.
Okay, I get it. Now it's going to be tough to try harder after I don't know. That it's a lot at the very least. If you want to make that point, cool, maybe they respond to it. But at the very least, you're talking about 6 minutes combined for the only other guys on the bench that you were willing to play in a 40-point loss that was over in the fourth quarter. Okay.
And my point about the bench was really a point about like if they've got any shot of winning. But if we're being realistic, if we're being realistic, like, if they've got any shot of not getting blown out by 40 points, then it is about Brandon Miller being more aggressive. Then it is about Miles Bridges making sure that he has more games like he had against Atlanta where he is an efficient shooter. Then it is about that. Everybody has to play well. They literally have to play perfectly to win a basketball game, even against, that Brooklyn game was a perfect example. Like even against a team that's sort of middling, they've got to play perfectly. But if they just want to avoid getting embarrassed for the rest of the season, it is on the leadership of this team to pull that off. Nick Richards, too, has to pull. We haven't mentioned him. He got punked, I thought. 12 points, 16 rebounds. You look at the box score, you like that. But you really watched that game, and he got punked by Capella a few times. He got punked by Fernando a few times. Like, Fernando mostly ate when they went small, but Nick Richards was not anywhere close to as physical as you need to be when you're the only decent center on the roster.
Well, and Capella, Capella only did not have a rebound in the first quarter. It was very small. He was not impacting on that end until you started to go a little bit further into the game, and then he got his 10 for his counting stats. But I thought that was going to be a big Clint Capella game. We've seen him have monster games against the Hornets before, and it wasn't. He'd settled down a little bit.
Clint saw Bruno and said, "Whew, I got a night off. Great, kick the shoes off."
Bruno was the guy. 11 of 14, as you mentioned, 25 points. That was a career high for Bruno Fernando. They also shot, just the last stats to mention, they were 20 of 42 from 3, so that was excellent from them. They were 50 of 90 from the field overall in this game. They had 40 assists, Doug. The Hawks had 40 assists in this match.
Well, they were allowed to pass at will. That was the whole, when you look at, like, we can say things like trying hard, but when you apply that to what actually happened in the game, one of this team has traditionally, this season, particularly right before the trade deadline and then moving through, they've been a deflections team. This has been Trey Mann, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges. Everybody has been in passing lanes, had the awareness to 100. They didn't have that this game. The Hawks were allowed to pass at will. They were allowed to drive at will. No one was being touched at the rim. Look, they've done a lot of losing this season, folks, and I've had to write about every single one of these games for everyhornetsboxscore.com, okay? I have rarely this season gotten to the end of a game and went, because typically I'll do my notes, and then I'll go back and write sort of the recap stuff at the top. I got to the end, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to write about this game. And I know a lot of people that turned it off in the fourth quarter was like, I can't do this anymore. These Hornets players who are going to be part of this organization next season, they should take some personal responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. Because once you get that stink of quit on you, it is really difficult to get it off you. It's what Clifford has been talking about all season. There's a difference between teams that lose and teams that are losers, teams that have a losing mentality. They can't allow themselves to slip into that. And that's everyone has to take some responsibility for that. And even if they lose by 5 every single game, if they lose every single game, they only lose it by 5, and they try their ass off, then fans will be okay with that, and they'll be ready, geared up for next season. But if they get blown out by 40 and play like they did against Atlanta, fans will give up on them too.
Yeah, it's a brutal stretch. I think it's the toughest strength of schedule the rest of the year, and so I hope it doesn't get uglier. I hope it just remains the same level of ugly, but who knows before we get to the end of the season. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. Check out everyhornetsboxscore.com. Listen to me on WFNZ 92.7 FM in the Charlotte area. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.